When you play the Game of Thrones, you
Subscribe and like.
or you die. There is no middle ground.
Alright, hello YouTube, and welcome back to the Grease Goblins YouTube channel. In today's video, we're going to be talking about my top 10 A Song of Ice and Fire chapters. This will only be covering the main story, not Fire and Blood and, the Duncan Egg Tales and stuff like that. Just be the main story. But before we get into the video, if you guys like to like, subscribe, and comment for more of this type of content, please do help the channel reach other people that might like this content as well. And let's get into it. Now, before I start this video, I do want to say this is probably one of the hardest videos I've had to make, because this is my favorite book series. I've said that on the channel multiple times, and there are about 350 chapters I could choose to put in this top 10. So I'm not going to do an honorable mentions because I feel like there are so many chapters you could put in honorable mentions. These are my top 10 favorite chapters, my personal opinion. So if you think I left out one, which you probably do because there's just so many good ones, let me know in the comments. Maybe even give me your top 10 if you'd like. But let's get into it. So I thought number 10, it was very fitting to put the prologue of Game of Thrones. So this is kind of where we see the opening of the entire series, right? We see the three Night's Watchmen going out and kind of discovering these wildlings that, they've been tracking, that, they're dead, but then they're not dead. And they end up kind of having our first encounter with the others. And we rarely have any encounters with the others in the book series. So this is a very ominous way and a really good way to show what the real threat is and what George is kind of trying to show. And for me, I like that George has actually kept them kind of mysterious in the books. This is one of our key indications of kind of their behavior, how they act. And when people try to theorize about the others, this is usually one of the chapters they look at. But looking at this, I thought it just needed to be number one because it's the thing that kick-started the entire book series and is still the overarching threat that is still going on as a whole. Also, I really love that this chapter just feels very eerie and very mysterious and kind of keeps you on the edge of your seat about if these characters are going to survive or not. And I really love this opening chapter, and I think it does a really great job of establishing the book. Number 9 is going to be a chapter that I'm going to probably do a video on next week, so stay tuned for that if you want to see that. It's going to be Catelyn 3 and A Clash of Kings, and this is going to be the Renly's Peach chapter. This is where Stannis and Renly meet. And to me, this is a great chapter because it kind of helps establish who Stannis is and a lot of his moral dilemmas and a lot of his kind of, I would almost say PTSD, comes from this chapter, right? Because a lot of what Stannis will talk about, and he almost references this in almost every single time we meet him for the next book and a half, is he always thinks about Renly's Peach, and he thinks about Renly as a whole. And Stannis and Renly are two very different characters, right? Renly is someone who has always kind of grown up in privilege, never gone through a lot of hardship, and is someone that kind of enjoys life. He has a lot of enjoyment. And Stannis is kind of the opposite. Stannis is someone very duty-bound, someone that is honor-bound, someone that really doesn't have a lot of kind of enjoyment in their life. He really doesn't like his wife. He kind of just feels like he's without enjoyment for this character. And it's something that we kind of first explore when it comes to this chapter. And also the back and forth between Renly and Stannis is fantastic in this chapter. We have the foreshadowing of Renly's death in this chapter, Catelyn trying to kind of reason between the two and kind of try to get them to settle their differences. And this just is truly a tragic chapter when you look at the big kind of theme of it, right? If you look at if they had just put their differences aside and supported each other, the war would have gone completely different. The Lannisters would have lost. It's a very tragic chapter when you read the books again for that second time or third time or fourth time, and you're reading it and you're like, just put your differences aside. And it just doesn't end up working, and we kind of know what happens in the rest. I'm not going to try to talk about the chapter too long just because I know I'm doing another video on this chapter. So yeah, stay tuned for that, and let's get into number 8. Number 8, I decided to put Kevin's chapter from A Dance with Dragons. This is kind of the last chapter that's official. I know we've gotten a couple Winds of Winter kind of chapters. Those can still be altered and stuff. So this is really the last chapter we've gotten. Also, I want to say, guys, I'm kind of still battling kind of a sinus infection, so my voice is a little messed up and or my nose, but yeah. Kevin, we're kind of seeing how well he's doing in his role here as Hand of the King and how much better the realm could possibly be with his leadership. And we kind of don't see Kevin Lannister, right? This is the first time we're ever in his head. We kind of get to learn about him a little bit more as we're inside of his head and all that. And as this, chapter continues, we start to see that, oh, everything is not as it seems, right? Varys comes into play and ends up killing Kevin Lannister to kind of continue the chaos. And this is what I think is interesting, because this is the chapter that I think a lot of opinions change on Varys. Because up to this point, it kind of makes sense that Varys is for the realm and all that stuff. But in this chapter, Varys is very easily undermining the realm. The realm is going to probably do well with their leadership, and he even admits this in this chapter. And then we also see kind of Varys's attachment to Aegon, which is something that's very weird to me, because Daenerys is the first person that they support, him and Illyrio, and we're seeing how much he's like, yeah, Aegon's going to come, and he's already here, and he's going to take over, and he's going to do a fantastic job. It's very odd the way Varys is just kind of flexing, like, yeah, don't worry, these people are not going to be here. Aegon's going to come over, and he's going to be a fantastic king. And we see kind of inside Varys' head a little bit, something we don't get to see very often with Varys. I think it's a fantastic chapter on how it kind of breaks down and sets the pace for the next book, where I think Aegon is going to be a big force in that book. And yeah, I really just love a lot of the things going on in this chapter. We see Pycelle die as well, and kind of this painting that the Tyrells might have been involved, or Tyrion. And that's kind of going to drive Cersei kind of nuts in the next book, as we see kind of her reaction to it and probably trying to pin it again still on the Tyrells. And that will probably lead to kind of this dissension between the two, which is already really bad as it is, and then Aegon coming in and taking them both out. Number 7 is going to be Jaime 5 from A Storm of Swords. Now, I'm not going to talk too much about this one again, because I just did a video on this week. If you wanted to see a breakdown of that video, I did about a 25 minute long video this week talking about that video, or that chapter, in depth. So I would definitely check out that video if you want me to give more of my thoughts for why this chapter deserves to be this high. But in long story short, this is the first chapter where we kind of see Jaime in a sympathetic kind of way. And we get a lot of our moral kind of conundrums with all the oaths Jaime has to take, and which ones he should be following over others, and which ones matter more, and kind of what was really going on with the Mad King. What really made him mad. And then all that alongside just itself, right? This chapter could have been ended when Jaime passes out, and it still would have been a fantastic chapter. But the fact that we get that, and the meeting between Roose Bolton, Jaime, and Brienne, where Jaime and kind of Roose Bolton are playing this game of what, Roose is going to do with Jaime. And we look at Brienne, where she just doesn't know what's going on, really. She doesn't grasping that Roose Bolton is really kind of betraying Robb Stark at this point. And it's just a very good interaction between these three characters. So that is why this chapter is up here, for mostly Jaime's story, but also getting the added benefit of getting that interaction with Roose Bolton. Number 6 is going to be Tyrion 11 from Storm of Swords. Now, this is basically the chapter where Tyrion, gets broken out by Jaime and Varys. And Tyrion learns, the Tysha reveal that Jaime was kind of lying, that, Tysha actually did love Tyrion. And then we get, Tyrion's betrayal by Shae again. And then we also get Tyrion killing his father. This is probably the most influential event besides the Red Wedding, because killing Tywin just cripples the Lannister family so much, as well as Tyrion as well being, leaving. And the two greatest minds of the Lannisters really kind of leaving the Lannisters, right? With Tyrion being probably the smartest of the three children. I mean, not probably, he is. And then Tywin being probably the most cunning and smartest individual probably in Westeros at this point. It is an incredible thing that he has killed in this chapter. It sets up the next two books really well. And then also you have Tyrion, kind of the breakdown of his character, right? Where he's always been this character that's kind of in that morally gray point. And this chapter kind of turns him into kind of almost evil, right? Where because this will lead him into the next few chapters where he's just, I mean, not even the next few chapters, I'd say the next book where he's just down a very bad hole and he's in a very bad place because of this chapter. And this chapter just does so much to kind of forward the plot, pay off so much that's been built up in this book with the tensions between Tyrion and Tywin after the Purple Wedding and even before. This chapter just deserves to be on this list. I think really no matter who it is, I think they will at least think this is a very good chapter and will have this very highly regarded. Now, again, going back to a Game of Thrones, at number 5, we had Ned 14. Now, Ned 14 is one of Ned's last chapters, but this is the one where, you have Ned confronting Cersei about the children. It's where Robert Baratheon dies. It's where you have, Ned trying to kind of get the Lannisters out of power with the Golden Cloaks and Littlefinger betraying him. So much goes on in this just chapter by itself. Just think about how much is impactful that happens in this chapter. Robert Baratheon dies, so your main king dies, right? Which creates this entire, thing of the Clash of Kings, the whole story where who is the legitimate heir and who is going to win that war. You also then have Ned, who is our main protagonist. We're all thinking, hey, he is going to, take the throne from Joffrey, the character we don't like, and Cersei. And it backfires. We see Ned imprisoned and all this, and it's just very unexpected. And this is kind of the first big chapter of a Game of Thrones and of the story in general, where we think, the good guys don't always win. You could also maybe throw in maybe when Ned's executed as well, but I thought this one deserved to be at number 5. But let me know what you guys think. Number 4, we have Tyrion ate a storm of swords, and this is going to be a common theme. We're going to have one more Tyrion chapter on this list, but the Purple Wedding, again, George really knows how to write character interaction. And Tyrion, this entire chapter is just kind of being it's just kind of a boiling point where we just see Tyrion constantly being just picked on by Joffrey the entire time. And we see just George really makes our absolute hatred of Joffrey go to its max in this chapter. And then we get to the point where Joffrey starts to choke a little. And we're sitting here going, yes, please kill this dude. Kill him. But the weird thing is, it's such a cruel death. The poison that is used is it's just such a horrible death that you almost kind of sympathize for Joffrey and Cersei, because it's not something like, Robb Stark, who, he gets shot a few times with arrows and then, he gets stabbed and he's dead. This is something where it's like you're basically losing all the oxygen from yourself. It's almost like you're being choked to death, basically, like you're actually being physically choked. It's a horrifying death, and Cersei's reaction to it is priceless. And Tyrion getting kind of accused for it makes perfect sense in this regard from a lot of our other characters. Cersei, it makes perfect sense. A lot of, Tyrion's in a very bad place with he puts himself almost in a bad place to be accused in this chapter. And we also see this mystery of who killed Joffrey. Because we as the audience, unless you're very keen on picking up details and just kind of figuring out motivations, we really don't know who killed Joffrey. It could have even been Tyrion for us, even though we're inside of his mind and this is a kind of a surprise. Who knows? We just don't know who it could be at this point, right? It could be a number of characters. And to me, I think this is a chapter that definitely deserves to be up here just for the payoff of Joffrey finally getting the mystery of who actually did it, and just the raw emotion and the character interactions that go on in this chapter for me make it number 4. Number 3, we have Dany 4 from A Clash of Kings. And this is the House of the Undying chapter. And to me, the reason this chapter's on here is it foreshadows so much. And even with that being said, we don't actually even have all the payoffs of this chapter. People are still making kind of theories based upon this chapter alone. I made a video this week where I was talking about Stannis possibly becoming an other, or of the Night King, becoming the Night King or something like that. And I cited a decent amount of evidence from the House of the Undying. So if you look at that and you look at kind of where Dany goes, where we see kind of Rhaegar, we see the Red Wedding, we see probably Stannis in this vision. Could be as an other, like I talk about in that video. And the implications this kind of has as a reader, if you're picking up on things, it's a very big chapter. And the payoff we kind of get with Dany to finish out this chapter, it really makes this chapter, good for me. And I think this is the best Dany chapter. I think you could also maybe throw in When the Dragons Are Born. That's another big one that I thought about putting on this list, but I didn't think it deserved to be on here. I thought this Dany chapter was significantly better for me, but, you guys might have a different opinion. And that is number 3 for me. Number 2, we have Tyrion's trial. Now, what I think is amazing within this is that we get not only Tyrion's kind of trial in court, right, where he's trying to say that he's innocent or whatever, and we get the betrayal of Shay, which kind of breaks Tyrion, right? It was one of those things where Tyrion, possibly could have taken the Night's Watch, taken the Black or whatever, but he doesn't. And that's just because he couldn't hold his tongue, and Tyrion just kind of goes off, and probably one of the greatest speeches, talks in the entire book series. And not only that, we also get that Oberyn is going to be Tyrion's, champion in this trial by combat, in a fantastic scene between the two of them. And then not only that, we also get the trial by combat in this chapter. It's not broken up really at all. We get that entire sequence of events in one chapter. There's just so much packed into this chapter that is fantastic. The crushing defeat of Oberyn, as we see Oberyn's winning the fight, and he just gets too cocky and doesn't finish off the fight and ends up dying. And we see the kind of heart-wrenching realization that Tyrion is probably now going to die. It is just a fantastic chapter of writing from George. And again, we see that the good guys don't always win, because Oberyn was just a fantastic character that is, a fan favorite to this day, off of only being really in one book, just because of how rich his character was and his interactions with a lot of the other characters. And we see him die within one book. And getting to number 1, I think for me, this is my favorite chapter. Based on the background, I think you could have probably figured this one out. But Catelyn 7, A Storm of Swords, and this is the Red Wedding. Now, I'm going to do a video about this probably in the next 2 weeks, just because this is kind of where I'm at in my reread of the series. And this, to me, is the perfect chapter. When I first read this chapter, I'd already watched the show, so I knew it was going to happen. I kind of teared up a little bit. I mean, the writing in this chapter it just takes you on a very emotional journey, right? You start off this chapter kind of feeling kind of eerie. It's a very eerie feeling. It's a kind of one of those feelings where you just want the chapter to be over. You just want to get through it. It's kind of like, let me put it this way. It's like you're going to a family event or something that you really don't want to go to, but you kind of have to, and you're just waiting for the night to kind of be over. That's the kind of tone we get from being inside Catelyn's mind. And the chapter kind of starts with this kind of eerie feeling, but the wedding's going on, everyone's kind of happy, and it kind of seems like everything's going to be okay, right? Edmure's married to Rosalind. The two seem happy together. And we just slowly start to get the hints that things aren't actually okay, right? And when that actually happens and Catelyn comes to the realization of what's going on, it is the biggest, your heart just sinks to the floor. I don't like Catelyn, okay? I've said that multiple times. I love Robb, right? But I felt for Catelyn here. Catelyn is a character that I don't like. I think she's a very kind of bad person, in my opinion, but she also has good characteristics as well. But just seeing the realization in Catelyn's face that she's, her son's probably going to die, and that he's being betrayed by the Freys and they're about to be slaughtered. It's just terrible. You see the bolts start coming in from the musicians, and you see just the Freys slaughtering the Starks and all that. You see Robb just in a terrible place, and Catelyn just kind of, she has an arrow through her or I think it was her shoulder it's through, and she's kind of just sitting under this table. And George gives us another tease, right? Because if you're somebody that hasn't been picking up on the foreshadowing of the Red Wedding, you see the kind of doors to the hall open, and you see the Bolton forces come in. And in Catelyn's mind, she's like, thank God, we have some forces to try and get us out of here, and for an instant, she thinks things might turn out okay. Until these forces start helping the Freys. And you go down, up, and then you're straight down from here. And it just continues, right? Where Catelyn, gets Walder Frey's wife. I always forget her name at this point, but she basically, takes her, has the dagger to her throat or whatever, and, is doing the whole thing where it's like, let us go free, which we know is probably never going to happen, but it's one of those things where it's that last-ditch effort hope, where we're down here and then we get a little up, where George is kind of playing with us like, oh yeah, there might be a chance that Robb and Catelyn live this. And we get no. We get the Jaime Lannister sends his regards. We get Catelyn's throat cut. And it ends like that, with Catelyn kind of thinking about Ned, and it's a horrifying chapter. It is just brutal. It is one of the darkest chapters or reading I've ever probably read. It's a perfect mix of emotions. It's a perfect payoff. And to me, it's the climax really of the entire book series. If you look at a lot of the things that have led to this moment, pretty much all the books have been leading to this moment. And I said this about the show and why D&D took the show, and I think it was for this moment. And I think after this moment, you can definitely see that they started to stop caring. I think they, in the show, they cared about the after effects of the Red Wedding, and then that's when they just stopped. With the end of season 4, where it really wasn't focused on anything with the Red Wedding after and all that. But this to me is the climax. If you look at how this impacts the rest of the story and stories through all of them, right? If we're talking about Brienne, if we're talking about Jaime, if we're talking about Sansa, if we're talking about Arya, all these characters, this to me is the perfect chapter. I just don't see anything wrong with this chapter. I think it is fantastically written, and I'm a fanboy for the Red Wedding. This is my favorite, it's my favorite, how do I put it, scene in the show. It's my favorite scene in the books. To me, it is perfect in the way it was done. It's heart-wrenching, but that is my top 10 Song of Ice and Fire chapters ranked. Let me know what you guys think. If you guys have other chapters you think should be on here, which, again, there are plenty you could do. I think even Ned's imprisonment chapter, where Varys is talking to him about, is it better to, die or to kind of maybe save face and help your daughters and stuff like that. I think you could do a number of chapters. I didn't have any Jon chapters on here. I think you could have done, the attack on the wall by the wildlings with Jon. You could have done Jon's final chapter in A Dance with Dragons. You could have done that one. Could have done some of the scenes in Clash where he's with Qhorin Halfhand. Those are fantastic scenes. There's some good ones with Ygritte as well. I will say I did want to put Sam's chapter where he's kind of talking about the Fist of the First Men on this list, but I just couldn't put it on here above some of these other chapters that I thought were a lot more impactful to the story. And for me, I liked personally a lot better. As well as, some things like the Battle of the Blackwater I could have put on here, but it's kind of told through two different perspectives, and they're kind of broken up a bit, so I think that one was kind of hard for me to put on this list as well. But that is my list. I hope you guys all enjoyed the video, and I will see you guys all in the next video. Bye, guys.
If you think this has a happy ending, you haven't been paying attention.